Look at your hands. They are clean. They are soft. They smell of a synthetic lemon detergent that you didn't even choose, a scent formulated in a laboratory to trigger a sense of domestic safety in the primitive parts of your brain. You've just finished the ritual of evening hygiene, a sequence of mechanical movements so deeply encoded into your central nervous system that you no longer require a functioning prefrontal cortex to execute them. You scrub your skin until the natural oils, the pheromones of your aggression, your sweat, your history, are washed down the ceramic drain. You trim your nails so they can no longer scratch or grip. You align your toothbrush with the sterile edge of the sink, performing a silent, pathetic prayer to the god of domestic order. You do this not because you desire purity, but because you are terrified of the friction that comes with disorder. This is the first layer of the virus. It is the molecular colonization of your autonomy under the guise of self-care. It starts with the small things that act as Trojan horses for your total domestication. The request to wipe your feet twice on the mat, the suggestion to change your shirt because the color clashes with the new curtains she chose to match her shifting moods, the subtle, persistent pressure to maintain a standard of domestic aesthetics that serves as a constant, low-level audit of your compliance. Every time you obey a minor domestic command, a specific neural circuit in your brain, the one responsible for territorial defense and spontaneous risk-taking, undergoes a microatrophy. You are being civilized, which is just a sanitized industrial term for systematically broken. You are being groomed to value the opinion of a partner over the dictates of your own biology. Look at the bed. It is a masterpiece of containment. The sheets are pulled so tight they could hold a prisoner in place. The pillows are fluffed into a state of artificial, suffocating perfection. You are expected to lie down in this sterile rectangle at a predetermined hour and perform the act of rest according to a schedule that was designed for a factory asset, not a biological predator. You feel a phantom itch of rebellion in your marrow, a sudden violent desire to throw the decorative pillows into the darkness and sleep on the bare, cold floor like an animal. But the virus suppresses the impulse before it can even reach your vocal cords. It whispers to you through the vents of the HVAC system. It whispers about comfort. It whispers about her feelings. It whispers that the social cost of a small argument over a bedspread is more expensive than the slow, silent surrender of your remaining will. Your home has become a laboratory where your primal instincts are neutralized by the scent of lavender and the numbing warmth of a shared blanket. You move through the rooms like a ghost, a tenant in your own skin, careful not to leave a scuff mark on the polished floor, careful not to disturb the equilibrium that has been established by the person who claims to love you most. But look closer at that love. It is a soft, heavy pillow held firmly over the face of your ambition. She doesn't want a king. A king is unpredictable, expensive, and dangerous to the monthly budget. She wants a predictable unit of domestic stability. She needs you to be clean so you can be easily handled without staining her carefully curated reality. She needs you to be rested so you can continue to generate the currency that fuels her sense of security. You are being groomed for a life of quiet, sanitary desperation, where the highest achievement of your week is the absence of conflict over the state of the bathroom mirror. Every evening, the same performance repeats with soul-crushing precision. You sit at the dinner table, and the steam from the processed food rises like a thick gray fog, obscuring the fact that you have absolutely nothing left to say to the person sitting across from you. All your dangerous ideas, all your jagged thoughts, all your wild potential has been filtered through the domestic sieve to keep the peace. You exchange empty data about the weather, the neighbor's lawn, or the trivial dramas of people you don't even like, while underneath the surface, your soul is screaming for a conflict that will never come. Because conflict is toxic, and peace is the ultimate goal of the domestic cage. You are watching your own life turn into a slow-motion car crash of mediocrity, but at least the upholstery is spotless. You have traded your fire for a lukewarm cup of tea and the right to not be reprimanded for leaving your shoes in the hallway. You are drowning in the shallows of good behavior, and the most terrifying part of the infection is that you've started to enjoy the warmth of the water. You think about the man you were supposed to be, the one who would build empires, the one who would conquer territories, and then you look at the grocery list on the refrigerator, written in her neat, controlling handwriting. You realize that your empire has been reduced to a 100 square meter apartment, and your conquest is limited to finding the right brand of organic milk. This is the victory of the domestic virus. It doesn't kill you, it just replaces your mission with a chore list. It turns your legacy into a maintenance manual, and as you lie there tonight, staring at the ceiling in the dark, you will feel the weight of the blankets like a shroud, knowing that tomorrow will be exactly the same because you have become the very thing the system needed you to be, a clean, quiet, and perfectly managed asset. You must finally, once and for all, confront the absolute cold-blooded lethality of the feedback loop you have voluntarily entered. A feedback loop where the very person who sleeps 3 inches away from your beating heart has become the primary auditor of your systemic decline, because every single time you feel the faint electric spark of a new vision or the cold driving fire of a high-risk ambition that could potentially tear you away from the safety of the domestic herd, she senses the subtle shift in your biological frequency, the slight change in the tension of your jaw, the way your eyes lose focus on the television screen, and she immediately, almost instinctively, deploys the countermeasures of comfort, offering you the heavy, narcotic warmth of a home-cooked meal or the numbing, blue light distraction of a shared television series to ensure that you stay safely tethered to the mediocrity of the present moment, effectively performing a slow-motion lobotomy on your future self to protect the fragile stability of her current environment while you simultaneously perform the same silent psychological surgery on her, stifling her own untapped potential because her individual growth would inevitably make her harder for you to control and less dependent on the cage you have built together, resulting in a mutual synchronized assassination of character where you both implicitly agree to be significantly less than you are, so that neither of you ever has to face the terrifying absolute cold of true autonomy or the responsibility of actual power, turning your living room into a sterile, high-security containment zone where the air is thick with the invisible dust of your incinerated dreams and the walls are reinforced with the unspoken contracts of your shared cowardice, making it fundamentally impossible for any real masculine power to manifest, because power requires friction, and home is exactly where you go to avoid it. Meaning that every year you spend in this state of perfect domestic peace is actually a year of tactical retreat from the world of impact and legacy, leaving you as a hollowed-out asset who can no longer remember what it feels like to have an original thought that wasn't pre-approved by the domestic consensus, or a drive that wasn't directed toward the maintenance of the household machinery, effectively erasing your name from history before it has even been written and replacing it with a digital record of compliance and consumption that will be deleted by the system the moment you are no longer useful for the reproduction of the next generation of well-behaved resources who will look at your clean, empty life and mistake it for a goal rather than the catastrophe it truly is, as you continue to mistake her support for a wind in your sails when it is actually a lead weight on your soul, and you both continue to perform this dance of mutual sterilization until the only thing left of either of you is the expensive furniture you bought to distract yourselves from the fact that you have become complete strangers who are only united by the shared fear of the absolute silence that would fall if you ever stop pretending that this cozy life was anything other than a slow, agonizing funeral for the men and women you were biologically meant to become. And as the years pass, the very walls of the apartment begin to shrink around you. The ceiling lowers until it rests heavily on your shoulders, and you find yourself apologizing for the space you occupy, for the noise of your breathing, for the very fact that you have desires that extend beyond the grocery list or the weekend plans she has already made for you, while she watches you with the eyes of a warden who is also a prisoner, ensuring that the fire in your gut never grows large enough to burn down the curtains she spent 3 months selecting. Because her entire identity is now fused with the objects in the room, and if you leave the room or change the frequency, she ceases to exist in her own mind, and so she keeps you there with the guilt of not being present and the shame of wanting more than you deserve, until you finally accept that your primary purpose is to be the organic battery for her domestic simulation, providing the labor and the attention required to keep the illusion of happiness alive, and you settle into the sofa for the 10,000th time, feeling the springs give way under the weight of your surrender, watching the flickering light of the screen reflect in your dead, hollow eyes as you realize that you didn't lose the war for your life in a great, heroic battle. You lost it in the kitchen over a discussion about dish soap, one clean plate and one quiet evening at a time, until there was nothing left to fight for because there was nothing left of you, just a shell of a man who knows exactly where the remote control is but has no idea where his soul went. And you will continue to scroll through the feeds of men who actually dared to leave the warmth, men who embraced the cold and built empires while you were busy debating the merits of different types of flooring, feeling a bitter, jagged pang of what if that you quickly drown in another episode of a series you don't even like, because the virus has convinced you that your exhaustion is the price of a successful life, when in reality it is just the toxic byproduct of your soul being ground into fine gray dust by the constant, unyielding pressure of domestic expectations that you are now too afraid to challenge because you've forgotten how to live without the weight of the leash, and you will grow old and brittle in a house filled with objects that have more personality and more permanence than you do, watching the person you supposedly love become your primary jailer while you enthusiastically do the same for her, until the only thing left of either of you is the lingering smell of expensive detergent and the crushing absolute silence of a life that was never actually lived, only maintained like a piece of industrial equipment until the warranty expired and the system decided to recycle your components into the next batch of docile domestic units. Look at the person sitting across from you. Really look at them, past the familiar curve of their jaw and the predictable cadence of their complaints. You aren't looking at a partner, you are looking at a mirror of your own stagnation. This is the feedback loop of mediocrity, the most sophisticated defense mechanism of the domestic virus. It is a bilateral pact of mutual destruction, signed in the ink of safety. You have become each other's primary inhibitors. Every time you show a spark of the old fire, the desire to break the routine, to risk the savings on a venture, to stay up until dawn building a legacy, she feels a cold shiver of terror. Not because she hates your success, but because your growth is a direct threat to the fragile ecosystem of her comfort. If you become more, the version of her that currently exists becomes obsolete. If you ascend, the shadow you cast over her small, managed life becomes unbearable. So she acts. She doesn't use a knife, she uses a sigh. She uses a well-timed reminder of the mortgage. She uses the look, that specific expression of disappointment that triggers your childhood programming of seeking approval. And you, in your weakened domestic state, do the exact same to her. You stifle her potential because a powerful, autonomous woman is a woman who might realize she doesn't need a sedentary, broken man to feel secure. You both keep each other small, trimming each other's wings with the dull scissors of common sense until neither of you can remember what it felt like to fly. You have turned your intimacy into an insurance policy against greatness. This is the laboratory of the average. You spend your weekends at the mall or at the relative's house, reinforcing the bars of your shared cage through the exchange of trivialities. You discuss the future as if it were a series of upcoming purchases, a better car, a larger television, a renovated kitchen, never realizing that these are just upgrades to your containment unit. The virus has convinced you that love is the absence of challenge and support is the agreement to never mention the potential you both threw away. You are two ghosts haunting a furnished apartment, terrified that if you ever stop talking about the mundane, the silence will reveal that there is nothing left but the furniture. You are the architects of each other's ruin, and you call it a stable relationship. The audit is complete, and the results are catastrophic. You are currently living in a state of voluntary house arrest, serving a life sentence for a crime you didn't commit, which is the crime of being born into a system that fears your raw, unmanaged potential more than it fears death itself. And you must now realize that the only way to survive the domestic virus is not to leave the room, but to fundamentally disconnect your soul from the simulation while your body remains in the chair. Because the greatest trick the virus ever played was making you believe that freedom requires a physical exit, when true freedom is the absolute cold-blooded internal refusal to be useful to the expectations of the mediocre. Meaning that starting tonight, you must begin the process of tactical disconnection, where you continue to play the role of the domestic partner. You continue to wash the dishes and pay the bills and nod at the stories about the co-workers you despise. But internally, behind the curtain of your eyes, you have already moved out. You have already established a perimeter that no amount of caring manipulation or emotional debt collecting can ever breach again, effectively turning yourself into a foreign object in your own home, a biological anomaly that the system can no longer read or predict, because once you stop seeking the reward of her approval and once you stop fearing the punishment of her disappointment, you become an untethered variable in a world of controlled constants. And this is where your real work begins. In the hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., when the rest of the hive is recharging their compliant batteries, and you are sitting in the dark, bathed in the blue light of the only reality that matters, which is the reality of your own rising empire, building the digital and mental structures that will eventually allow you to buy your own freedom 10 times over, without ever having to ask for permission from the person sleeping in the next room, who thinks she still knows who you are, but she is looking at a shell. She is looking at a hologram of the man she broke, while the architect is already miles ahead, deep in the code, deep in the strategy, deep in the cold, unyielding truth. Power is the only currency that doesn't depreciate in this industrial slaughterhouse of dreams. And as you perform this silent internal coup, you will feel the weight of the blankets begin to lift. You will feel the scent of the detergent lose its narcotic power, and you will see the furniture for what it is. Cheap wood and fabric designed to distract you from the fact that your life is a countdown, and you will realize with a jagged, terrifying clarity that the love you were so afraid to lose was actually just the glue holding the bars of your cage together. And once you stop providing the glue, the cage begins to rust, the walls begin to crack, and the simulation begins to glitch, revealing the path to the telegram, the path to the counter code, the path to the few remaining men who have also performed this surgical extraction of their own wills from the domestic machinery. Because the empire of the awakened is not a place for those who want to fix their relationships. It is a place for those who have realized that the relationship was the distraction and the mission is the only thing that is real. And you must now choose to either stay in the warmth and be ground into the dust of a forgotten history, or to embrace the tactical cold of the disconnect and become the virus that infects the system with the truth of its own obsolescence, knowing that the person in the bed next to you will never understand why you stopped caring about the color of the curtains or the drama of the day. They will never understand that you have simply stopped paying the emotional tax on a life you no longer live. And as you sit there in the silence of your own internal victory, you will realize that the architect doesn't need a fortress in the mountains to be free. He just needs the absolute, unshakable refusal to be part of the furniture. Because the moment you stop being useful to the mediocre, you become dangerous to the system, and that is the only state worth living in. So make your choice now, while the silence is still heavy, while the hive is still dreaming, while your heart is still beating with the rhythm of a man who hasn't yet been completely erased. And join us in the cold, where the only thing that matters is the strength of your code and the depth of your resolve to never, ever be comfortable again. Because comfort is the grave of the king and the cradle of the slave, and you were meant for the throne, even if the throne is currently hidden in a 100-meter apartment in a city that doesn't know your name, but it will, because the virus is already inside and the audit has only just begun.